Well, in the words of US President Joe Biden in Helsinki just a few hours ago, Zelensky, in fact, was happy in the end, but it took quite a while to get there because he did arrive at this NATO summit here in Lithuania pretty frustrated with how negotiations were happening while he was on his way here. He called those negotiations absurd, and he didn't get all that he wanted, and certainly the Ukrainian people didn't get all that they wanted. Many believe that the country deserves now to become the 33rd member of the military alliance. But even Ukrainian President Zelensky clearly admitted to that publicly during his press conference here in Vilnius that is simply not going to happen, that Ukraine is not going to become a NATO member while the war with Russia is ongoing. The speed at which Ukraine will become a NATO member is supposed to be quite significant, though, once the war ends. But of course, that still leaves that very open question of how does this war end? And we heard two points of view of this essentially at this NATO summit. The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying that it is up to Russia to end this war. It can end it whenever it wants. That's essentially true. And then Ukrainian President Zelensky saying that this war won't be over until Ukraine has got back all of its territory, every single last village. In other words, this is going to take a while until the doors to membership of NATO are truly opened up to Kiev.
But Zelensky still got further security guarantees. What did they include?
Well, these security guarantees were first presented by the G7 countries on stage here in Vilnius together with Ukrainian President Zelensky. What they are is essentially a bridge between the current moment and Ukraine becoming a NATO member eventually. Each country, though, will have to come up with its own bilateral agreements, maybe also in groups of countries with Ukraine as to what exactly they will be providing Kiev with, what kind of weapons, of course. And Zelensky does leave this NATO summit with some significant promises when it comes to further military aid for Ukraine. He tends to make quite a lot of demands for military aid, logically as well, and has been criticized for that sometimes, for maybe asking a little bit too much, but he tends to get there in the end. Remember that what he wants now and what he and the Ukrainian government have been demanding again and again is fighter jets from the United States, and they are getting closer to getting those, or at least having pilots who are trained on them. There is set to be training that begins for those Ukrainian pilots already in the next few months.
And very quickly, Philip, the president is returning home after wrapping up the summit and his last stop in Finland's capital. Will the White House be happy about this trip?
Yeah, it will. It will be happy with what happened here at the NATO summit in Vilnius and also with that last stop, because it was really designed to celebrate the fact that NATO has already got its 31st member country. That is Finland, precisely where Joe Biden visited, and with, of course, the possibility of another of the countries that was represented there, Sweden, becoming a NATO member also, most likely at some point after October. For those reasons alone, the United States would say that from its point of view, this trip to Europe and maybe particularly this NATO summit here in Lithuania were a success.
Philip, excellent reporting as always. Our thanks to you, Philip Crowther of the Associated Press International correspondent.